Why We Bleep is sponsored by Signal Sounds. I must have dozed off. Oh, I was having a wonderful dream about that James Blake. Was I asleep long?
You've been asleep for 8 months!
Oh, well, I was due to get a better alarm. And what better way to make alarm sounds than with a modular synthesizer purchased from Signal Sounds? Yes, let's head on over to the website right now and let's see what we can see. Oh, looks like the Fill 4 from FSS is out. Future Sound System's crazy Buchla. Mega wave fold-in filter that makes sounds more complicated than the ones you put in. Look, Mum, no computers. Girl Filter's been doing great. The Percons from Erica is finally shipping. The Otis Audio Love Beams. Oh, I think I saw one of those in that Myla Melodies video. Sounds excellent. Excellent. Oh, look at this. Loads of experimental noise synths and mad tape loopers from Era Instruments. Nobody knows what any of this stuff does, but it's great. The last ever shipments of Mutable. End of the line, as well as the Korg Harp 2600. Retro Newness, the Torso T1. Marjorie, I'm back. So if you've awoken from an 8-month slumber and want to spend some compound interest, head to signalsounds.com. That's signalsounds.com. Oh, and by the way, if you're in Glasgow, the showroom is open. Why? Hi, May08. How are you? Yeah, I know it's been ages. I know. We've got to hang out more. So if you hadn't gathered, this isn't my full-time job, and for a variety of reasons, everyone's favourite podcast featuring meandering chats with people connected with electronic music has had to take a bit of a back seat. But don't fret your beautiful face one moment longer, because Marjorie, we're back. And today I am going to share a chat with none other than Kaitlyn Aurelia Smith. That would be Buchla practicing boundaries of electronic music pushing Kaitlyn Aurelia Smith. She writes amazing music, playful, vibrant, and transcendent music with multi-layered electronic music instrumentation and her voice manipulated and enhanced in a myriad of creative and original ways. But she returns with a new album. This album is called Let's Turn It Into Sound. And in this, she turns the ineffable into sound. It is an incredibly complex and freewheeling record, and I heartily recommend that you give it a go. It's challenging, but it's refreshing. Changes on a sixpence, and it really is kind of freewheeling imagination turned into sound. I actually didn't ask Kaitlyn in this interview about her beginnings with synths, and that's because that's just been really covered by literally every other interview that you can read of hers. But I will just sort of relay the backstory here in case you don't know it. And that is that she went to Berkeley College of Music, and studied composition and film sound, but was not a synthesizer person. She was not sort of into synths or had physical experience of hardware synths. And she's from this place in Washington called Orcas Island, which is this beautiful green space. And apparently when chatting to her neighbor, I assume in Orcas Island, about her beloved Terry Riley, her neighbor was obviously massively into Terry Riley and was like, "Oh, I've got a room full of Buchla synthesizers. Would you like to borrow some Buchla synthesizers, modulars that I've got?" I don't know about you, but I'm thinking about moving to Orcas Island because if these are the neighbours, then sign me up. And borrow she did. And this began a love affair with the Buchla synthesizer and synthesizers in general, and a deepening sort of, hands-on experience, truly hands-on as well. I think that's the critical aspect with Kaitlyn Aurelia Smith, because as you see her perform live and the way she performs and records her music is very much based in physical performance, physical playing. And the Buchla instrument that she's most known for, I think now, is the music Easel. I can't think of a more sort of perfect musician in terms of someone who is using that instrument in a way that it was clearly intended to be used. And so we didn't talk about the origins, but we do talk about the Buchla synth. I wanted to ask her about that. And of course, also about the processing of her voice, which is something that is really apparent when you listen to her record. She has like wonderful, original processing. She obviously uses computers and other synths outboard, and we talk about this too. And we talk about the value of practice. That I think is the most critical of things, because she performs her albums live, a feat that I think deserves special recognition given how dense and freewheeling they are. We can chat more later. I think you've waited long enough, so without further ado, on with the show. Let's hang out with Kaitlyn Aurelia Smith. Thanks.
Yeah, feeling so excited about it. It's always a long process. I finished the album about a year and a half ago, and it always takes a while for it to actually get out. At first, when I got familiar with how long it takes to get albums out, I was a little bit impatient about it, where I was like, oh man, I just want to share it. But now I really have grown to appreciate the timing between finishing it and sharing it, because then I get to fully recycle into the listener state, and then I get a refresher before playing it live, where I'm like, oh, okay, cool, I got to experience it as a listener now, and I'm ready to go and play it live.
I have listened to it, and I've not listened to it enough, really, because it's so dense. It's super dense. And I was sort of struck by the pace and the level of creativity and things that are in there. It's, you have tracks that they're 4 tracks in the first 4 minutes, or obviously they're not, but it's just, but you know what I mean? They turn on a sixpence in a way that I've not really, I can think of very little other music that I've heard that sort of does that. And I think that's really cool. What were you thinking going into this album? What was your goal with it?
Yeah, I didn't really have a goal, but I had a really strong feeling, and it happened so fast. I made the album within 3 months. It was a exuberance bubble inside me where I was like, oh my gosh, I just feel all this stuff. And it just came out so fast. And it was honestly just really, really fun. It was just it was one of those creative experiences where I was really excited to wake up each day to work on the next part. And I knew it was a drama. I knew it was theatrical. And I kept on calling it my sentimental robot drama because I knew it had this kind of alien feeling to it. And the new vocal processing had a very robotic feeling to it, but it was really sentimental.
It's a drama. Can you talk, what does it mean to you, basically, or does that need to be said?
I guess it's I got really intrigued with the somatic experience of life, and I was studying somatic therapy for a while, and just fell in love with how bizarre and wonderful it is that there's all this information stored in our somatic experience that our conscious mind doesn't really have access to, that it just has to come out through art, basically, through dance, through singing, through sounds, through something other than our language center, our word aspect of our brain. And that was really intriguing to me. And I mean, at the time that I wrote this, there was just so much, and there still is so much going on in the world, and there always is. And I really wanted to make something that was kind of like a tribute to that helpless feeling of when there's so much happening around you and you don't know what to do. And so it's just like, you just want to like throw it up into sound or like you want to, it's like that sentiment of like, at least I can like make sound at the very least. And so I'll just like turn all these feelings into sound.
Yeah. And so are you describing I just don't know enough about the subject, but are you describing like your unconscious, like the sort of the inexpressible, or is there something more specific than that?
No, it's like the somatic experience it's like all the information that's stored in your body, that's like stored in the sensual aspects of your being. Like it's like when you have those reactions to something where you're like, like it just like, it's not a word. It's just like, and some people might say that's frustrated, but then someone might not feel like frustrated describes it. And I think a lot of other languages have more gradients in, like compound nouns. And so this album is really inspired by like the compound energy, like the compound language. And I feel like a really big inspiration at the time for me was also fashion, like really bold, extravagant fashion, like sculptural fashion, felt like it was communicating everything I was feeling. And so there's like a lot of like boldness in, I think, the sounds, because that was like just what wanted to come out at the time. And there's like a lot of hidden sounds within the sounds of like me like going like hiya. It's really dweeby, but
That's good.
Yeah.
I don't, now you've said that, like I definitely get that idea of it was almost listening to it, it's like the sounds are sort of on a catwalk like processing, and then suddenly someone comes around the corner and it's like da-da, and it's like wearing the most insane thing, and you're just like, what?
Yes.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it totally does, and it turns fast. I literally actually I had to check that like some of these tracks were like playing back properly. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean it in like, it's like this is not structured like other music, and so it's jarring, but it's not in a bad way. Like I mean, I think we all have to be open-minded, and it's like this is how we discover new things. And it reminds me of some of that, the most experimental music that I've heard. But then it's got just such a wonderful kind of playfulness. And I think in a lot of your music, there's been, those elements like really fast little arpeggios, which, when you put like eventide sparkles on them, they have that kind of, that almost that sense of like a little sort of elfin kind of chattering sound. And there's a lot of, there's always been kind of playfulness in your music. It's quite optimistic a lot of the time, and I think it's a delight to hear, because I think a lot of the time electronic music can be quite easy to make somber things, and sometimes it's not cool to be optimistic or playful. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I get a lot of negative comments about the playfulness. So it's nice when people appreciate it, because I always have fun with it. So, and I think there's a lot of like, I mean, if you look at just the playfulness of even kids, there's like always really, there's like a vast, there's like a variety of emotions in playfulness. Like there's always a lot of fear and anger and all the things in it. It's never just like, oh, everything's amazing.
Yeah, human beings are complex. It's not just, and certainly, I mean, I have a toddler, and it's this sort of sense of childlike play. I think that music is supposed to be fun, and I make a lot of, dance music, and I think with that style of music, which is not necessarily what you're making, but it's just, I think that's another one where it's like actually going out and dancing and like dressing up and being with friends is supposed to be a fun, playful event. So it's funny that then dance music gets appropriated by people like wearing all black and being too cool for school. It's a bit of it doesn't fit in that sense that the music's not too cool for school. Music's meant to be fun. So
totally. I mean, I love dance music and I love dancing. And in a way, this is like my dance album. This is like a dance album in like a very like avant-garde dance club, an experimental dance club.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. But it is, yeah. And I mean, and obviously the video that you released is like, it is animated fashion character dancing.
Yeah.
And I realized that it's someone wearing like, and in this sort of colorful, outrageous world, that's kind of how it sounds. Personally, often when I write music, I don't approach it from the sense of like meaning, which is really naive and sort of rubbish of me. And it's sort of, what it did make me think is how electronic music is uniquely good for expressing the inexpressible. And there's other people who've quoted saying similar things, where it's like, what's great about electronic music is it helps you, you can create this sense of an emotion that you can't quite name, if that makes sense. Like, there's certain feelings when you hear certain chord sequences that make you feel this kind of, like you were saying, like the compound word, like in German, where there's like the word that is like three feelings concatenate together.
Yeah.
I think electronics are particularly good for that.
Yeah. I know. I feel like art in general, and like, I feel like this album also really brought me back to the root of like, oh, right. Art is like, it's not just for some people. It's like, it's for everyone. It's like where you express the unexpressible or the ineffable. And I remember reading this book. Did you ever read Kandinsky's Concerning the Spiritual and Art?
No, right, a failing.
Not at all. It's a really short book, but it's all about how most artists like go through so much training, and then the like follow up to all the training is like to get back to the baby brain, where you can like get back to the flow state. And I'm always like really inspired by trying to get back to that flow state.
Yeah. What's the quote that we're all born princes? It's the, humanizing process that turns us into frogs.
Oh,
something like that. Yeah. Which is, and like, yeah, definitely. Like trying to retain, it's always when you first start making music, and that first music can be quite naive, but it's often quite good in a way that I've had that, like listening back to old music, and I know other people I've spoken to have said similar things. Like I listen to my old tracks and they're kind of rubbish, but they're kind of awesome in a way that and maybe it's just trying to be too cool for school. I don't know if it's just that. It's like people go, I'm too mature for that sort of thing now. But actually, the naive, your naive self was kind of onto something.
Yeah.
So regarding like the writing of it, I mean, how do you approach composition in general? Do you kind of write as you play live? Like, I haven't seen you play this, but I have actually seen you play before, and, seen how you were playing ears, I think.
Oh, cool.
But I suppose the question is just composition in general. Like, how do you tend to compose, and like, what have you changed over the years?
Yeah, it depends on the project, and it depends on if I know I'm going to play it live. Like for all my albums, for the most part, I know I'm going to play them live. So from the beginning, I set it up so that my recording is thinking of how I'm going to play it live, so that it's like a really easy transition. But if I'm not going to play it live, then I just like have freedom and just like do whatever. And that's always really exciting, because there are a lot of constraints to when you're going to play it live. But for the most part, I just like, the one thing that is always the constant is that, at least for my albums, it's different when I'm doing a commissioned work. When I'm doing a commissioned work, like I think of it as like I am translating for someone. So my excitement is like, oh, how can I like find a way to care for like what this person is feeling and turn it into sound. But then for my own albums, it's like I wait for it's like a filling. Like I get filled with information. It feels like almost like where it's like all at once I'll get like a I call it like my inner gong, where I'm like, I get like a ringing where I'm like, okay, I got it. I know what it's going to be. And then it's just like how to bring it into actualization. And so that's not a very technical answer, but basically it's many words to say I wait till I get inspired.
It sounds like it's based on a feeling and not a melody or like a phrase or a hook or a word. It's like literally a feeling.
But it's like all of it at once. It's like because I'll feel, when I get the feeling, it's like I've heard every melody that's going to be in there. And like, it's like I hear it all at once. And so that's why I call it like a filling, because it like feels like I get like filled with a lot of music and I can like hear it without, like I can like hear it inside myself. And then I'm like, okay, now is the time. But then there's also times where like I'm asked to write something and I don't have that filling. And so then I usually just, I do a lot of like failing exercises to get that out of the way, where I just make really bad music purposely. And, or like what resonates to me is like, I'm going to rephrase that. I make music that I wouldn't comfortably want to share with someone.
Right.
And then usually in that process, I find a beginning point for something.
You literally deliberately are like, I want to do the wrong thing multiple times. What does it teach you? Like what do you learn from that?
It's like, it feels like I'm feeling into like past my boundaries to find like a new opening. And so it just takes the pressure away of like, oh, if I do this, then it's going to be a waste of time because I always do this and this and this. And for me, like inspiration always comes out of novelty. And so like, I'm always trying to learn new things and always trying to keep it new in some way. And I think like the failing exercise helps me get to new places, because I'll just wander for a really long time in some like super uncomfortable area. And then I'll find something where I'm like, oh, that can actually turn into something.
Because the alternative would be to do just the thing you always do, isn't it? Like a quick win here would be the thing that I know how to do.
Yeah.
So it makes complete sense when you say it like that. And it's like, yeah, that's amazing. I've met other musicians who like are very consciously not trying to repeat themselves. And are like, I would be bored if I did that. Do you feel that sort of way you're always going to try and do something new? Is that essential?
I feel like the analogy that I guess comes to mind is like, I feel like I have my hands in like 30 different paint bottles, paint canisters. And it's just like, how many combinations can I make with these? Because it doesn't feel like I'll never return to something. I'm sure I will, because there's definitely times where part of the like ingredients to something new is also reaching into something that I maybe did on like an album a few years ago. So it's not like always a progression of like never go back.
It's like, well, you could always return to like an old fork in the road, basically, and go, maybe I'll just go the other way. I suppose, and see what that, yeah.
I remember asking a teacher when I was a little kid, because I was one of those little kids that wouldn't stop asking questions. And I remember asking a teacher what imagination was, and they said, it's just like infinite combinations of things. And so, and I still return to that, where I'm like, okay, I'll just like keep combining new things.
Yeah, novel things are often like, combos of existing things in a novel way.
Yeah.
I don't know if at this point, can we create anything truly new? I suppose it is always going to sound like mishmashes of things. That's why like mashups are so wonderful, because it's like two things that I never knew could go together. How novel. And then entire genres get born.
Yeah.
And then do you, equipment-wise and stuff, did you have an idea of like, I want to surround myself by a certain type, certain things? And what were you surrounding yourself with?
I've kind of always been the type of musician that is like, whatever is around is what I'll use. And I've had a very similar set of tools for like the last few years. And then occasionally I'll go and do residencies where there are like really big collections of different things that I can like sample and make instruments out of. But for the most part, I just used what has been like in my tool set for a while now. And it's still a lot of Buchla sounds. And then I have a couple Moog synthesizers, and I have like one of those little Oberheim SEM modules. And that thing has been really fun to use. And then a lot of it is my voice too, like a lot of recontextualizing my voice.
So I'd love to talk about synth, but the voice thing is particularly like, you mentioned that it's, well, I think the press release is like there's a new like vocal processing technique, and I'd be really interested to hear like what is it? What did you discover?
Yeah, I don't really share it because I'm still using it.
Yeah, okay. It's special sauce.
But
Can you say, at least help me understand the kind of the world of what it does to you?
Yeah. It's just like, it's mostly that I figured out like a new way of making new resonating bodies for my voice, and just like creating more like characters, like where it could sound like a really fluffy giant or like a really like tiny little creature or like a really like low man. Yeah. So it was just like playing with that stuff.
Okay. I won't pry more.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
I know someday when I'm not still using it, then I'll probably open up about it. But
you've used like, I know that it like certainly on like ears, because I could see those performances, like you were using the H9 and I guess like quadrivox and stuff, which is, like the Eventide. It's a lot of Eventide algorithms that have amazing like pitch shifters and stuff. But
yeah, I never used those on my voice.
Right.
I used them on the H9 was just for the Easel. Yeah, and for like looping.
So then your computer does your voice, basically?
No, I mean, I do use Ableton for as my mixer because I like to like not bring a ton of pedals with me, and so it's nice to have a lot of effects like in Ableton, which is really nice. But for ears, that one I can talk about because I won't use that technique again because it was so tedious. But I had like a controller basically where I like mapped out all different scents so I could do microtonal harmonies, and I could change them and play them like chords as I was playing, like which harmonies were going to play with me. But that wasn't using like a harmonizer. It was like a thing that I had made in Ableton, and it was really tedious, and I would never do it again. And I wouldn't recommend that anyone did it because it took a lot of muscle memory to remember which shape my hand was going to play for which chord I was going to sing with.
I see. So that it's like almost like a vocoder in the sense that you're playing the sound that you're singing to, or is it just that you play chords and it would then match those with your voice?
It's not even that sophisticated. It wouldn't even do anything like that. It was just sense, like pitch shifting sense of which ones were on or off of like to make it microtonal.
Yeah, bonkers. And it sounds beautiful. I mean, a lot of that stuff. And seeing you play it as well, I mean, I just couldn't do that. Do you know what I mean? I'm like it's like a form of electronic music that I probably thought could only live on a record. I think you've showed me that it could be played in a way that I wasn't, especially things like even the Music Easel, which is obviously built for recall. It has like little card slots and stuff. But, I don't think you were using those, at least. I don't remember seeing you. You were kind of just...
Yeah, I haven't used that yet, which I know I'm curious about it. But although I personally just love playing, I've always been like a musician that just loves to play like keyboards, loves to play guitar. And I love practicing. I'm like a practiceaholic. So there's like something really... I don't know. I love the unfolding of what happens when you practice the same thing every day for a year. It's just like, it's a gift that just like keeps giving because it goes into muscle memory. And like the reason why I say it's a gift that keeps giving is because like, I mean, I don't know what everyone's experience is, but at least my own experience with muscle memory is that like, it feels like magic. because it goes into this like part of your being where you're like, what? Now I can like think about whatever I want, and my hands are still moving.
Yeah.
And it just like feels like you go into this like Jedi zone.
That's amazing. I mean, it is that saying of like, when you go up to a musician, you're like, you could ask them, where do you get your guitar? Or like, what guitar is that? Not how much do you practice? Because that's actually the real question of like, what determines like, what's good or not. I mean, actually, yeah, I remember just watching your performances, like where it's like you're doing so many things so fast. But that was it. I listened to, I can't remember the name of the book. It was an audiobook, but it talked about practice and how when you look at people's sort of brain activity, the activity of a novice at a task, whatever it may be, their brain is like lit up, like really, really lit up. But the brain of an expert is like inert. It's like they're not having to think about it because they are, it's become part of a different part of their brain. And so they're free to think of other things, as you said. And then obviously you can bring all other levels of creativity to bear because you've taken care of the sort of the bare muscle memory and stuff. And I can't imagine what that must be like. I mean, certainly things like Buchlas, they're made to be played the way that you were playing them. And I'm sure Don Buchla would be proud of seeing how you're interacting with those instruments. It's like, that is absolutely what they exist for. It'd be interesting to like pick your brain a bit about the music easel specifically, because it feels like that's like not maybe the only, the biggest instrument for you, or, there's lots of other things that you play, but just be really interested in your thoughts about it. What does it mean to you, and how do you approach playing it?
Yeah. First of all, that's such a like high honor comment to say about just like what you're saying with Don Buchla, and I mean, it's interesting. The easel for me, it was just one of the first things that I played, so it's the most like connected to my brain. Like it feels like an extension of my brain. I don't have to think about it when I'm playing it, and there's still many moments where as I'm playing it, like even when I'm playing live, I'll have moments where I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen, which is really exciting. And I hope that never changes. I mean, I think it also has benefits in that it is carry-on size. So it's like, it's been really perfect for bringing it on an airplane. And there's just a reliability of, I've played so many shows with it that I know it's going to work, and I know what to do when something happens to it. For the most part, I know like it's little quirks that I know how to like maneuver around it. And I've brought other things on tour with me before, and it didn't last. Like they didn't last, and I don't want to like call anything out, but I'll just say it was in the Eurorack world. And so I returned to the easel because it was honestly just like really reliable.
I mean, I've only played one very briefly, and I really don't know a great deal about it. I've never owned one. I would love to. And I know it's the kind of thing like, you buy an easel, you really want to learn to play it. I think I love that it never changes. And it sounds like that's obviously the most important aspect, one of the most important aspects, because as you well know, I mean, you've got a load of Eurorack stuff, and it's just the problem that you can always change a Eurorack, but you can't change a music easel because it is what it is. So you got what you got. That's it. Learn to play it more. And I think that's really, really powerful. And it's something that constantly bothers me, certainly. And I have lots of Eurorack, and I do love it. But I find myself, as time goes on, thinking less about like, I just want to get another module, more about, I want to put together these modules in a very specific configuration and try and learn them. But I just don't think that any of us can, we're not disciplined. I'm speaking to myself here. I don't think I'm disciplined enough to commit to something like you would commit to a music easel. And perhaps that's just why it's such a good instrument. It never changes, and it is what it is. But as you say, you keep discovering new things with it. And I mean, do you have like particular strategies, things you love to do that might be, people might be interested to hear? Like, what do you tend to do with it when you play, and what tends to surprise you? How do you sort of find novel things in the same old circuit?
I mean, I think I'm just like a loyal instrumentalist. Like, I think like I was like that with guitar too, where I was always, I guess, like in a state of wonderment with like how many sounds it can make, and also was frustrated by its limitations. But I just feel like music in itself is what makes something novel, and I feel like it's like a like an alchemy of like the state of mind that I'm in that day, like what music is coming through it and the instrument. Because there's definitely like instruments that I don't resonate with. But I still believe if I spent enough time with it, I probably would resonate with it. And so it's just like deciding which thing I want to spend time with. But I do think that like every single instrument has the potential to be like the instrument.
Definitely. Do you have like pairings of effects as well? I mean, you mentioned the H9. For you, if you were just playing with the Easel and maybe a couple of effects, what would you choose?
I don't really have like go-tos because it just depends on like the mood. And I honestly really like the dry sound of the Easel. I'm not someone that I don't like reverb that much, so I hardly ever use reverb or compressors. And sometimes I use delay, and I do a lot of looping. Like probably looping is like the biggest effect that I do. And like a lot of EQs. Like I feel like there's so much you can do with EQs and like filters. I do a lot of like granular. So much of it like comes back to layering for me, and layering and like music, like the harmonies, the melodies, and just like playing with the synthesizer to make animals, to make like environments. Yeah.
I like, there was a video you put up of the two voice, like doing
cool.
a sort of like bug swamp, which is amazing.
I know that thing can make so many animal sounds.
Someone would be proud, I'm sure. That is, and was that like looped as well? It wasn't like all just live coming off that one synth, right? Or was it?
That one was when someone let me borrow a two voice. So that was, I think that was off of one synth because it had two voices, and it was just going like between all the different animal sounds.
It's like a swamp. Like,
yeah.
It's amazing, like, the stuff you can get from it.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to talk about your studio. I mean, and particularly again with the album, just to get a sense of like what you put around you. What were your sort of, when you're talking about sort of getting filled up and like getting ready to play, like what's just enough to express yourself and not too much? What sort of things do you surround yourself with?
Oh, that's a fun question. I like particularly like the part of what's just enough. I feel like I'm really content with like the most minimal thing. Like on road trips, I love writing just with my phone and like making vocal, like a 4-track app on my phone, and just making vocal pads and like singing over it. Like I do a lot of writing that way in the car, which is really fun. So that's like probably just enough, is like being able to layer my voice a little bit.
And with no effects, I guess, or
just
minimal
try.
effects.
Yeah. I mean, I really feel like just that, and any instrument that someone put in front of me that I knew a little bit about how to play. Like if someone put a tuba in front of me, I would be like, okay, give me like a year or more. Like there's definitely limitations in instruments. Like I don't know how to play string instruments, like besides the guitar and like mandolin. Okay, I don't know how to play like cello and violin and that stuff.
Yeah.
But if I had a lot of time to practice it, then I would love to learn it. Did that answer? Sorry, I don't know if that went off on a long.
Well, the voice is like,
Yeah.
And that is, the voice is just such an insane synthesizer.
Yeah.
It really is. It can sound like lots of different things. And it's also directly connected to our brains. And in a way that is like, otherwise your hands get in the way of, you have to teach your hands to do what your brain is asking. But your voice, you can just blurt it out. And it's, I totally get that. The voice is an amazing synth.
Definitely. It really is. And I feel like I really love just writing on a piano. Like I love just having a simple piano.
Yeah, because it's about the music, i.e. the notes, not necessarily the tone. Although pianos do sound beautiful, of course.
And then as far as like synthesizers go, like I feel like I'm just really grateful for the collection that has like come into my life that I have. And so I try and just utilize those or like go to residencies. I know I already said that, so sorry for repeating it.
No, but it's true. Yeah, so you can go and try other things that you don't own. You don't need to worry about buying or liking. You can just try them.
I feel like in general, people who are into synthesizers are like all. I mean, I don't know everyone that's into synthesizers, so I can't say this across the board. But I feel like most people are so excited about synthesizers that like they lend each other stuff. Like they're like, hey, do you want to borrow this? And I'll borrow this. So I do a lot of like borrowing.
That's good. If you've got a good like synth borrow network.
Yeah.
We do crave novelty. And that's obviously what keeps the whole industry ticking over, is this the promise of some new thing, because it's like some kind of, on one level, maybe it's the magic bullet. On another level, it's just like an opportunity to hear new sounds and things. And so it's nice to be able to satisfy that novelty without having to buy anything, without sort of succumbing to the capitalist kind of machine. You can satiate novelty by just trading things and then hand it back.
And you can go into those synth shops that we were talking about and like try stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard to know what you're going to gravitate to. And I'm sure that you must have found that, where there's things that you think are going to be awesome, they're just not. And then some things that surprise you. And I definitely found that's true of Eurorack. I think a lot of the time where you don't really get the opportunity to try stuff. And I don't know if there's like a good shop near you, but like, there is not really that many shops near me, and I think for a lot of people who'll be listening to this, there'll probably be not many places. So you kind of have to take a punt on things. And it is a delight to be able to, if you can just try things. I mean, you do have obviously mentioning Eurorack specifically, I've seen, I don't know if these are the systems that you still have, but I like to see that you'd organized your systems by manufacturer. You hadn't jumbled up and frankensynthed your systems. You had a studio electronics system and a make noise system, and you let them be, what the manufacturer sort of intended perhaps as an ensemble.
Yeah, I don't have that much Eurorack stuff. The studio electronics was being lent to me. That was one of the things that I was borrowing. I do have a make noise system, and then I have one 4MS module, but that's really the extent that I went to with.
That's cool. That's a sensible extent.
Yeah. I've always been one of those people where I really like to keep track of everything. And so honestly, too much of something is overwhelming to me. The only place that isn't true is when I'm actually making music. I feel like I let myself explode with how many things want to come out. But in the actual physical world, I get really overwhelmed by too many things. I feel like what I'm particularly interested in life is how far I can go with something, to see just what unfolds when you stick with something and keep practicing it.
I suppose everyone's got their own sort of goals ultimately. And I think there are a lot of people who own all that stuff and they just enjoy tinkering with it, and that's enough for them. But I definitely, personally speaking at least, you've got to write music. That's it has to have a purpose. Otherwise, what's this stuff for? Obviously, there is a meditative aspect, which I'm sure you've experienced too, where you, by using this equipment and just the process of exploring electronic gear, it kind of ties up your brain in a certain way that you can feel like I've had that, like when I've felt like I have meditated after I have used a Eurorack synth, just stood and patched it. And I don't know, yeah, there is a calming effect, which I'm sure you must have experienced.
Definitely. Which I've always loved that is like the effect. And what's happening in real time is like we're all listening to like like really awful sounds for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like inside it's bliss.
Yeah.
And then but you also, there's a lot of quote unquote real things, not just your voice, but like woodwind, particularly on your music. And there's snippets in this album where there's like a moment where it's just like, 4 clarinets, I think, or like more, all the same layered up. Maybe it's clarinet. And like I always think of the track Stratus, which was, and this is a genuinely true story, that was my #1 played track on Spotify one year where...
Oh, wow.
That is really true.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an absolute banger. Anyone listening to this, I thoroughly recommend that you listen to Stratus because it's just, which I think is it clarinet that's in that tune?
Yeah, it's a quartet, a woodwind quartet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's not really a question. It's more a statement. I really like that piece of music. I think it's wonderful. And it's sort of that, woodwind. I don't know if you want to just talk a bit about that. It obviously captures something in your brain tonally, is it? Or is it just, what is it about the sound?
Well, I go through phases and when I was in college, I studied sound engineering and composition, and I wanted to do film scoring and compose for orchestras. And then I got out of school and I didn't have access to orchestras. And that was like at that point when I wanted to give up on music because I was like, I don't know, I'm just playing classical guitar. It's not what I want to do. And then synthesizers came into my life. And ever since then, I've always still wanted to continue to write for orchestras. And so I've broken it into small ensembles because they're more accessible. And then I would just find a player that could play like a small array of the instruments that I was composing for. And so for years, I just worked with one player and I composed for all of his parts and wrote them out. And then he played all of them. And then on the Kid, I did more of like a brass ensemble. And then this one, and on Mosaic, Mosaic was full orchestra. That was like when I started to go more towards full orchestra. And that was at the time of the pandemic, but there was all this hope of performing with a bunch of orchestras. And I got to perform once with the BBC Orchestra, which was like the dreamiest thing ever.
Wow.
And then this album, I really wanted to play with like kind of confusing people on what is a synthesizer and what is an orchestral instrument. But there are definitely woodwinds, and I composed for the same player that played on ears. And then there's also a lot of parts where it's a synthesizer, but it sounds like an orchestral instrument.
When you're composing for woodwind players, are you using like sample libraries and stuff, or just to kind of pre-visualize, or do you feel like it might be a tricky one to do?
It just depends on how much time I have. Like for the BBC Orchestra, I wrote it out in Finale and in Sibelius, and they both have their issues, so I use both of them. And
yeah.
And then made actual sheet music and did the whole thing. But when I don't have that much time, and if it's someone that I'm really comfortable with, then I can send them just the MIDI parts, and then they can just learn it through the MIDI parts. So it just depends on how much time and how professional it needs to be.
And you have classical training, and it'd be interesting to sort of get your take on the importance of that. You live in a world of or you're composing in a world of electronics, to a large extent, in what way does it manifest itself? How do you think you might be different if you didn't have that training?
Practicing is still like such an innate part of who I am that it wouldn't have even mattered if I didn't have that training. I probably still would have fallen in love with like practicing. I have like an ongoing joke with some of my friends where like I just always want to be in a montage. That's just like how I want my life to be.
Like running up and down steps, with the Buchla.
Yeah, basically. and I feel like the classical training, like it feels like if it wasn't that, it would be something else probably. Like I just always love to have something that I'm learning and getting better at.
And then regarding practice, do you have like a sort of, I was about to say a practice, but as in like a
practice for practice.
Do you have a practice?
I do. I am like so dweeby about it because the brain gets, actually, I think that book that you were referencing, I've either read that or it like connects to a technique that a lot of people have talked about with practice technique, where it's like in the beginning, when you're first learning something, it's like so many neurons are firing. And so I love to like approach practice with excitement every single time that I'm going to practice the same thing, where I do something different about it, or I like zoom in on something and I connect it to, because I also have like a physical practice, like with my body as well. And I connect that with my musical practice, where it's like for instance, I have an obsession of handstands. So like say I'm like, okay, I only want to focus on doing handstands on this one hand today. And I just want to like really zoom in on this thing. Then I also connect that to that day musically, where I'm like, I'm just going to focus on like how many things my right hand is doing and like really nailing these parts. And so I feel like moving around and like focusing on mastering with like quotation marks, because I don't like really think about mastering as like the goal, but like focusing on like trying to get progress in one area and then switching the next day, so the brain is like always having a new experience.
It's also what you're describing is, I think I've heard referred to as deliberate practice.
Yeah.
In the sense that
yeah.
It's sort of the difference between just like aimlessly doing something and just hoping for the best and being like, no, I am actually going to focus on this thing that I need to get better at, this one aspect. And that sort of laser guided. I've heard also that it's important to like reflect, to like listen back to things so that you can kind of, judge where you've gone right and wrong. Obviously, it's helpful to have mentors to do that. And I guess you've had to be self-taught for, obviously all the music that you make, but do you know what I mean? Do you have a way around that, or are you just, what you're good at and what you're not good at and what you need to work on?
I definitely do a lot of reflection. I tend to focus on the areas that I feel the most vulnerable, because I have found that I get the most amount of progress when I zoom in on the area I don't want to zoom in on. So I tend to like spend the most time in those areas.
Are any of your systems kind of playing themselves to any degree, or are you sort of, have you programmed specifically, or do you try to like leave as much as possible to be played and therefore use like loopers and other ways of like going, right, well, I'll play everything one by one? Do you choose to relinquish control in any way?
I try and do as much playing as possible and do like the looping route, and like we'll set up environments that I can play as much as possible. So, because it's like, it just depends on the song and depends on what I'm doing. It always is like about what is going to be the like best experience that I can create for myself. And also I care about people who are going to be listening to it and want them to have a good experience. But for the most part, like in order for me to get into a flow state, there's a certain amount of like crossing that I have to do with my hands. I've just learned that for myself. And so I set up my equipment in ways where my hands have to maneuver back and forth. And then it like puts me into a trance.
Literally, you mean like the process of moving your hands back and forward is just like, it helps you focus.
Yeah, it puts me into a flow state to have my right hand have to do the bass motion sometimes and my left hand play the melody instead of just like sticking with like my left hand's always going to do the bass, my right hand's always going to do the melody.
Yeah, it's quite sneaky.
Yeah. It's just I guess we're all just like learning how we work.
Yeah. I mean, but it takes a conscious, like, I want to work on something, therefore you set it up to make you do it differently. Like on the ARP 2600, there's that trick of like using the inverter to invert the keyboard so that when you play the keyboard, all the notes are left to right, back to front. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I love that stuff. Oh my gosh. I love changing the fundamental on the easel where like when I look at the keyboard, what is C is no longer C. And I'm like, oh, yes. Now I'm in like such a nebulous, weird world.
You can play the same old shapes and get different things out, right? I mean, I'm sure you can scale the keyboard in odd ways on that, I guess.
Yeah. You got to stick a little screwdriver in it, but yeah.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Do you have like it's like the Bemi one, like the more modern easels? You don't have like a 70s easel?
No, I wouldn't bring that out of the house if I had a 70s easel. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, indeed. I don't know what the difference is. Other than I've heard that the Bemi ones are quirky, put it like that way.
Well, it depends on which era of the Bemi ones. But honestly, all of Buchla's instruments, like pre-Bemi, they were all, similar to violins. Each one was its own instrument. Each one had its own characteristic. And the Bemi ones, there are different eras, and like more recently there are engineers that were working with Don Buchla that are now working at Bemi, and so there's a lot of like returning to like the core components and like engineering of it. I've gone through like a few different versions of the Bemi ones, and they've all had different things that I like about them. But the most recent one, or actually I can't say the most recent one because I've had this one for the last like 4 years, but I really like it a lot. I
would like one. Sell off some euro and like just get one. I don't know. I would have to learn to play it in its fullest extent. But I love the idea of not being able to tinker with it in the sense of like change it or, I don't think I would bother with the cards either. I think I agree that it's like, it's an instrument and it's just about making the beautiful sounds that it makes and finding a good melody within that, which is, at the end of the day, that's what makes us feel the emotions, Although, do you have that where you're it's as much about the tonality, or is it because I've spoken to some musicians where they're like, it's about the tone, the texture, more than the melody. It sounds like you're the opposite.
I think it's all of it. I think it's like, I don't let anyone mix my music because I'm so precious about every frequency where I'm like, no, that's part of it. Don't take that out. And even mastering, I'm really, really particular because I just feel like it's all a part of the composition, like every frequency. And I think it's all important.
Yeah, what is your secret? Because that's hard. I mean, I really struggle with that. Like mixing music I find very difficult. I don't think I trust my ears. Well, I definitely have problems with my hearing as well, so it's definitely not helping. But like, it'd be interesting to hear your take, like how you remain objective doing things like that, because I imagine it would be so hard to stay objective. Do you have any secrets you can help me with, please?
Oh, I mean, the main thing that I do for mixing is like, well, I do a little bit of it as I'm going, but the main thing that I do is like, I go into my like director part of my brain where I'm like, okay, what's the story that I'm going to tell? And like who is, I mean, this is, I guess, how I would approach orchestration as well, where it's like, okay, who's the leader at this part? Like, who's talking? And like, who's like the backup story, like the background characters. And I organize everything in that way and make sure that like, okay, that person's done talking. Now this one is like, that's kind of the main way that I approach mixing. And I don't personally do like a ton of like compressors, EQs, and all that stuff. I love the overtone series, and I have always like firmly believed in like mixing with the overtone series. And so I do like additive mixing when I approach mixing.
So how do you mean?
It's similar to orchestration again, where it's like, it's more blending. Like I'm thinking about the overall sound of like, I bring all of the frequencies up to the same level to hear like, okay, what's my like wash of all frequencies, kind of the way like when an orchestra tunes. And then from there, I'm like sculpting like the story, where it's less about taking things out and like trying to make room. It's like more of a maximalist approach than like, probably if I only had like 4 parts, then like I would maybe want to treat those parts through hardware and like make them sound unbelievable. But because I always have like so many parts happening, then I like to like approach it through like the orchestration technique.
How many parts would you normally have like at any kind of one time on an average, of course?
I don't know. I don't really count it. Like, especially when I'm looping, I'm just kind of like flowing. So I don't really count it. But if it's on a piece where, okay, before I'm even like getting into the playing, usually to make one sound, I'll like create matrix systems where I'm like blending things that are like sometimes 100 tracks. And then that becomes one instrument, where I'm like, okay, that's one sound. And so it just depends on like what I'm doing and the approach.
So do you mean that you will literally like collapse something and then dump it into a sampler and play it, or just treat it like it's one thing? Do you know what I mean? How does that work in practice? Again,
it depends on what I'm doing. but sometimes I'll do that where like I'll think of it like an instrument maker. And again, it like all stems from the overtone series for me, and I'll stack things up and then I'll put that into like a sampler, and then like use a controller and make an instrument out of it.
Yeah, that's nice. Oh, by the way, also with loopers, I was curious what do you have a favorite looper, or is there a sort of functionality that is important to you that you need? Do you know what I mean? Or do you use a particular looper?
Yeah, I just use good old basic Ableton.
Ableton's
because
looper,
because especially with playing live, like I just try and keep it as like minimal as possible with what I'm actually using in Ableton, so that I don't have to ever worry about Ableton crashing.
Yeah, like as in by using its default looper, it's like the least amount of DSP that it will.
Yeah, and then I don't really need too many advanced things on it, just like basics.
Yeah, it's interesting. I only relatively recently got a looper. Like I got the Boss RC505, and it's the flow state that it can create when you have just enough. That's like just enough to have fun with, but not too much that you tie yourself in knots. It is a wonderful way of making music. It's something that I need to explore more. I suppose then there's really just one more question, which was, what is the future of music technology?
Ooh.
Which dropped in like that is just like, sounds really like I'm asking a lot. But I mean, you obviously have got a very pragmatic approach to technology, in that clearly the equipment is serving you and you're not serving the equipment, I think.
Oh, I hope it's both.
Yeah. Because also, things like you're using technology to expand your voice and go beyond what you're just the voice alone can be. And so it'd be really interesting to hear what is the future of it. Where do you think that like music technology and music, both software and hardware should go?
Well, my brain doesn't take me to where it should go, but I have been thinking about this recently, at least for myself, and something that keeps coming up for me is like I keep getting drawn back to the original place of music, of like where it all stemmed from, and it brings me back to like just wanting to be a really good musician, like a really good fluid player. And so it's kind of like the opposite of delegating things to technology. And I think like technology is so incredible in all of the things that it's offered us. And I feel like, at least in my like hopeful version of the future, I hope that it goes into a place where it's really balanced of both like what we delegate to technology and what we're capable of ourselves. And that there's like still always a like revealing of like us learning what we're capable of and the technology assisting that. I don't know if that answered it.
I think that totally answered it. Whatever the future of music technology, it has to be in service of our expression. Music technology must help humans better express our inner voices or feelings, It should serve us and us not serve it. At no point do I feel like, the technology is enslaving her as such. It's like she may be surrounded by synths, but she, by God, is telling them what to do every, millisecond of the time. So yeah, like I get that sense that's like her goal, like being consumed with an urge to express something that's wordless, deep and personal and ineffable, like the true meaning, inexpressible, like a thing that you just can't put your, finger on, but it's something that she's trying to express. And I'm really impressed by her practice of practice. We can all learn from that. Everyone practices, of course we do, but do you practice as much as she does? And and what was her words? That I love the unfolding of what happens when you practice the same thing every day for a year. It's a gift that keeps giving because it goes to muscle memory and then it feels like magic. She can then think of other things because her hands are just going, and she wants her hands to cross over because it entrances her as she plays. Like really interesting insight, like amazing. And yeah, what's the other thing? It was, imagination is infinite combinations of things. Imagination is mashups. And it's like, yeah, like I know that, right? Of course, but I think it's important to just think of that. If you ever feel uninspired, just mash some things up, by God. And there's always new combinations. I don't know whether there are, new things under the sun, but definitely Kaitlyn Aurelia Smith is trying to discover them. So I thoroughly recommend that you put Let's Turn It Into Sound into your ears. And then put Ears into your ears and all her other albums because they are ace. And Kaitlyn is touring now. She is touring in the US, I believe, but she just announced tours in the UK and the EU. Denmark, Norway, the UK, including Leeds. Yes, mate. Leeds, where I am based. London, I've heard of it. Colchester, Manchester, Norwich, Brighton, Belgium, France, Netherlands, Germany. The last four are not based in the UK, sadly, but yes. If you are in any of those places, ensure that you get your hiney to the show and see Kaitlyn Aurelia Smith play, because you will witness someone who has been practicing for literally years, has made a serious effort for you. And you should bear witness to it and let it expand your understanding of what it is possible to play live in the electronic music sphere, because I think she's exemplary. Go see her play. stream, buy the album. Do it. So yeah. Thank you, Kaitlyn Aurelia Smith, for generously giving your time and being ace. Thank you for listening. And I'm sorry it took so long. Thank you for being so patient. More bleeps to come. Next up, got a chat with the excellent Rival Consoles. Yes, a very interesting chat with Rival Consoles. So subscribe, by golly, if you don't already. And if you do want to support the podcast, visit patreon.com/Mylar Melodies. Consider hopping aboard. There's a whole community on Discord, lots of other wonderful people, or just tell your friends. That actually is an incredibly valuable thing, and you could do it for free. Please share this podcast if you enjoyed it. That is how we can help it grow. So yeah, hope you enjoyed. Sorry it took so long, but we're back on it now. Thanks very much. Be well, and we'll chat soon.